Chelsea. So Chelsea and I first met 2 years ago at the Most Powerful Women Dinner in New York.
That's right.
And
when Ursula Burns was on stage.
Ursula Burns was on stage, and Ursula Burns is here this morning.
Oh, and she was talking.
There she is, back there.
Hi, Ursula. She was talking so passionately about so much of what the secretary was just highlighting, the need to get more people into STEM, but particularly more women into STEM education and careers. So sadly, we're still having that conversation, Ursula, but hopefully we're making progress.
And we're going to talk a lot about that this morning.
Terrific.
Yeah. So I'd like to give a little bit of a background, because even though you think you know a lot about Chelsea Clinton, I bet you don't know how much she has been doing, which is, if you think you're educated, and if you think you multitask, wait till you hear this. So Chelsea got her BA at Stanford. She got her Master's of Philosophy at Oxford in 2001. Correct me if I...
2003, but I'll
2003. She worked at McKinsey and at a hedge fund in New York for a little while. She got her Master's in Public Health at Columbia. You're now pursuing your doctorate.
Hopefully I'll finish this year.
In International Relations at Oxford. You're a special correspondent at NBC. You're on the board of IAC, Barry Diller's company. And now, fairly recently, you're vice chairman of the Clinton Foundation. So Chelsea, have you had a career plan? First of all.
No. I wish that I had had one galvanizing ambition that I could reverse engineer my life toward. As my father said before, I mean, he was 5 the first time he realized he wanted to be president and thought he could be president. And so that was his not only kind of motivating ambition, but kind of then the lens through which he made all of his decisions. I just have always really wanted to make a difference. I've had this amorphous kind of, ambition to kind of make the maximum difference I can, to be the best person I can be, to be the best daughter, wife, citizen that I can be, and then tried to figure out how to manifest that, either in sort of preparing and gaining skills and tools, as I think is pretty common for people when they're in their 20s, when I spent 7.5 years working at McKinsey and on Wall Street, or kind of trying to figure out the right educational toolkit. And then now, through my work with the Clinton Foundation, to manifest that in a more deliberate, determined way, day in and day out.
So we want to talk about your work at the Clinton Foundation, but I'm curious, this educational toolkit, as you call it, why philosophy? Why?
I didn't, that's just what the degree's called. So I got a master's in international relations.
Okay.
And then
so that's
my
just
doctorate is building on
a
master's degree.
Okay, all right. So public health and international relations. And, okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, so, even though, why is it called Masters of Philosophy? Is that just what?
It's just the term of art. I don't know the academic vernacular. You should ask the Chancellor of Oxford. I have no idea.
Okay, well, we'll work on that. So before we get to your work at the Clinton Foundation, I'm curious why you spent 3 years at McKinsey and 3 years at a hedge fund. Did you think you might want to stay in the business world, or did you see that as fairly short chapters in a career dedicated to something else?
Oh gosh, I think you give me too much credit for having had a clear crystal ball in my early 20s. I was at McKinsey for almost 4 years, and I went to McKinsey because in my early 20s, everyone I knew who couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with their lives either went to McKinsey or Bain or BCG, went to an investment bank, or went to law school. And there's lots of knowing chuckles in the room, either for yourselves or for your daughters and sons. And so I thought about those different, not paths so much as sort of sorting mechanisms, and interviewed at different places. Really liked the people that interviewed me at McKinsey, could envision some of them hopefully as being profound mentors. So I went to McKinsey. I loved my time there. And then I left not because I was tired of it, but because I wanted to learn about something else. And I think once you've spent more than 3 years somewhere, you have a good sense as to whether or not you want to grow up and be your boss. And as much as I loved it and had learned a tremendous amount, I didn't want to grow up and be my boss. And so I thought I should try to go figure out a different paradigm that maybe would be more meaningful to me and perhaps more of a path.
And the investment world then, what was that about?
I lived in New York, and by that point I was dating the man who's now my husband. And so that somewhat limited my locational kind of solution set, because I thought, well, maybe he might be my husband. I had more of a sense of my romantic reality than clearly my professional one. And kind of my predictive capacity was much stronger in that dynamic, thankfully. And in New York, I'd worked with different hedge funds when I'd been at McKinsey. I thought maybe that would be something I was interested in. I'm deeply grateful for the more than 3 years I spent at Avenue. I loved the camaraderie. I loved the meritocracy of it. But I didn't fundamentally care about money as a metric of success in my life. And by that point, I was living with my now husband. His name is Mark. I feel like we should name him, not just my husband. I was living with Mark, yes. Acknowledge that. And he loved what he did at the fund where he was working. And I thought, wow, like I need to figure out what I'm going to love as much and be as invigorated by as he is. And then, I tried very hard to care about things that were different than what my parents cared about, because who wants to grow up and feel like it was just all so predestined, and that, of course, other chuckles, yes, lots of nods, that of course, children kind of often follow their parents' path. But ultimately, I did care about the same things in the world that my parents cared about, and ultimately, I thought I could make the most positive difference, or at least, as we say in my family, get caught trying to make a difference in those areas by working with the Clinton Foundation.
So you're now vice chairman of the Clinton Foundation, and your mother was actually quoted as saying, "It is a full partnership between the three of us." What are you doing there? And give us a sense of what your father and your mother are doing there.
Well, what my mother said captures certainly how we feel about it perfectly. I think all of our responsibility is to not only ensure that the work today is on strong footing, but that we're building the work for the future. I hope my parents live forever. I'm deeply biased towards both of them and love them completely, but I'm not impervious to the fact that my father had a very serious heart surgery almost 9 years ago now. And as we think about ensuring that the work kind of lives beyond him, and kind of this ethos of creative collaboration and partnerships, and trying to always have an exit strategy be part of our entry strategy into any challenge that we're tackling, I think we have a real responsibility to ensure that the foundation can live well into the future. And so very much that's part of what I'm focused on. And then there's certain programmatic areas I'm really focused on, particularly everything that relates to health, both here in the United States and around the world. Some of what are now our kind of passion projects, like trying to stop the illegal killing, trafficking, and demand for ivory, which is something my mother and I are deeply invested in.
Tell us about what's
the
meaning of that?
I'm so glad you asked. I was hoping that she would ask. If not about health and about ivory, I was going to keep just going through the list. Well, when my mom was Secretary of State, she started to first pay attention to the illegal ivory trade because the State Department, as well as the CIA, kept kind of picking up signals that implied that the same people who were trafficking in guns, people, other very nefarious things, and often destabilizing parts of West, East, and Central Africa, were the same people that were trafficking ivory out of those countries to then ship to markets largely, though not exclusively, in East and Southeast Asia. And so after the Westgate tragedy in Nairobi, it became pretty apparent in some of the forensics around what had happened, not just in the mall, but sort of at a systemic level, that about 40% of what was funding al-Shabaab was ivory.
Really?
Because there's been a real convergence in supply chains. That, for example, cocaine that reaches Europe now often routes through West Africa. So flown over from Latin America, dropped off in states that often don't have sufficient capacity to monitor their airspace, or if it's shipped, their ports, gets trafficked up West Africa, deposited into Europe. The same thing happens with heroin coming from Afghanistan or Pakistan, gets shipped to, say, Mombasa or Dar es Salaam or Zanzibar, and then tracked up East Africa. The same supply lines that drugs are being delivered by are the same supply lines that tragically people are being trafficked, predominantly women and children. And ivory is the lubricant, because sadly there's always ready populations of elephants to poach. And so while waiting for the more lucrative inputs into those supply chains, ivory is kind of what keeps them running. So it's a security issue as well as clearly an ethical and a moral issue. The elephant populations declined more than 65% from 1980 to 2012. There were more than 1.2 million elephants in 1980 in Africa, both forest elephants and savanna elephants, and now there are about 400,000.
Really? That is fascinating. I knew nothing about this.
Well, I'll keep talking about it. Maybe you'll write about it.
I think we might. This
I
is
would love
this
that.
is a business story.
This has already then been a successful summit for me, if you're going to write about elephants.
Okay.
We all have different
Well,
metrics
I
of
think it's
success.
A successful summit anyway, having you here.
Oh, well, thank
so,
you.
But this would be the bonus. So thank you for that story, and we will pursue it. How have you influenced your parents?
Well, again, no one's really ever asked me that before. We have been talking about the world for as long as I can remember. And the first thing I learned to read was the newspaper. And in Arkansas in the 1980s, until 1986, there were 2-year gubernatorial elections. Arkansas was the last state in the country to move to a 4-year election cycle. And so my father was also often campaigning in the same way that we think of kind of the House of Representatives being kind of ensconced in this perpetual campaign. And so there were always kind of different issues being discussed. And I mean, I'd like to think that maybe, I influenced them from an early age by asking, simple questions that hopefully were kind of helped my father clarify what he was thinking or make the case to a skeptical 6-year-old, which, hopefully was somewhat useful. But I think one of the ways that I know I've influenced my father, because he has said this both in public and in private, was when he asked me and my mother and some others, as he was leaving office, what we thought he could have done better. I said, I think you could have done more to fight HIV/AIDS, both here in the United States and around the world, to fight the stigma, to fight the epidemic, to prevent the spread of the epidemic. And he thankfully took that very seriously. And so the first work of the Clinton Foundation, after he started in 2002, was on working to change the market dynamics around antiretrovirals in the developing world. There were only about 70,000 people outside of Latin America who were on antiretrovirals in the developing world in 2002. That number is now over 10 million. It's still not the 33 million that it should be, but it still has been a major increase. And more than half of those people that have been added, so more than 5 million people now access antiretrovirals through the more than 70 different purchase agreements that the Clinton Foundation's helped negotiate. So I'm really proud of that. And although I think my father probably would have done that work anyway, if I was able to play a small part, then I'm really grateful for that.
That's great. Thank you for that. Who has a question? Over here, if we can get the mic over here, and
Chelsea.
please identify yourself.
Hello.
Yes.
Chelsea, would you ever consider running for public office?
I don't know is the honest answer, which I realize is not necessarily a very satisfactory one, but it's the honest one. People have been asking me that question for as long as I can remember. One of my earliest memories is being in Magnolia, Arkansas, which probably Nancy Snyderman's the only other person in the room who's been to Magnolia, Arkansas, and at a campaign event for my dad. And I remember this older woman saying, like, "Are you going to grow up one day and be the governor of Arkansas?" And I remember saying, "I'm 3." And I think for a long time, that was just my instinctual response, albeit with different variants as I got older. And until my mom ran for office, I had never been ran for the presidency, I'd never been engaged in active campaigning. And when she ran, throughout 2007, I really just still stared at my 4 Bloomberg screens every day. I think I thought that that's what I was going to do in 2008. And then after the New Hampshire primary, I just thought I could not imagine doing whatever I could do as a daughter, as a young woman, as someone who self-identifies as a progressive, to help whomever wants to listen why I so passionately support my mom. And yes, I'm unapologetically biased towards her. And so as I engaged in that, and then over the next 5.5 months did more than 400 events in 40 states, sometimes with 2 people and sometimes with 20,000 people, I realized, wow, like it does really matter who not only is in the political arena, but also who is kind of participating and trying to support those in the political arena. And so very much now, I feel like it's my responsibility to not just show up and vote at the ballot box, which I've always done, and to ensure that my friends feel really guilty if they don't go and vote, but to help support candidates that I really believe in. And now I live in a city and a state and a country where I support my representatives at every level. I've loved living in Mayor Bloomberg's New York City most of the time. I really support my governor. I really like my representative and my senators. I really like and support my president. And so if at any point in time that stopped being true, where I had a question about their ethics or their competencies, and I thought that I could make a disproportionately positive contribution in the political arena in the same way that I feel very grateful that I can do now through the foundation, I'd have to ask and answer that. But now that's just not true because I am so grateful that the people I support are my political leaders. But in the future, I don't know.
Thank you for that question. We don't have much time left, so I'm actually going to ask the last question. Your father was governor of Arkansas when you were born. You have never lived your life outside of the political arena, and this is the first time in your life that your parents are not in office. My question is, have you talked with your mother much? Have you given advice to your mother about whether she should run for president?
Well, so my father was governor in 1980 when I was born, and then he actually lost in 1980. He lost in 1980. He had passed a very unpopular driver's license tax to help ameliorate the effects of a devastating drought across the South and the Midwest in the late 70s and into 1980. He was succeeded by a man named Frank White, whom he then defeated in 1982. So although it's not quite accurate to say this is the first time in my life, it really is the first time I remember. I don't remember anything from those 2 years. I know we lived in a yellow house. That's about all I remember. And that my mother read Goodnight Moon to me every night, and my parents sang lullabies. But they're just sort of those hazy memories that little kids have. And now I'm very strongly exercising my prerogative as a daughter, and just making sure that my mom has this year to rest and reflect and write her memoirs of Secretary of State and engage as she wants to engage. And I'm grateful for the people who've even come up to me this morning who are so enthusiastic and supportive of her. But ultimately, she's my mom. And that's what's most important to me, that she is able to make whatever choice will be the right choice for her. because by definition, that'll be the right choice for me and our family.
Chelsea, this has been such an honor to have you.
Well, thank you, Patty.
Thank you for being so real and for open, and we hope you'll come back again.
And you're going to write about
Powerful
elephants?
Women's Summit. We're going to write about ivory.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Chelsea.
Thank you, Patty.